We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
They're going to catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me.
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're going to make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first.
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Hey, all you hep cats and kittens, it's time for the American International Podcast. I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Merkin.
And today we're talking about Shake, Rattle, and Rock from 1956.
Shake, Rattle, and Rock was directed by Edward L. Cahn, written by Lou Rusoff. It's produced by Alex Gordon and James H. Nicholson and Sunset Productions.
Shake, Rattle, and Rock stars Mike Touch Connors as Gary Nelson, Lisa Gaye as June Fitzdingle, Sterling Holloway as Albert X. McAllister, Douglas Dumbrille as Eustace Fentwick III, Raymond Hatton as Horace Fitzdingle, Margaret Dumont as Georgianna Fitzdingle, Percy Helton as Hiram, the funeral director, Paul Dubov as Bugsy Smith, Eddie Kafafian as Nick,
Charles Evans as Bill Bentley, Clarence Kolb as Judge McCombs, Fats Domino as himself, Tommy Charles as himself, Jimmy Pickford as Eddie, Leon Tyler as Aloysius Pentagrouch, Pat Gregory as Pat, Rosie and Carlos as teen dance contest winners, Annitta Ray as Anita, singing teen, Giovanna Fiorino as Helen, Frank Jenks as Frank, the TV program manager, Joe Devlin as the squad car officer, Pierre Watkin as Mr. Armstrong, Nancy Kilgus as Nancy, Joker Campbell as himself, and Big Joe Turner as himself.
Shake, Rattle, and Rock opens with credits that play over the sound of Feeling Happy by Big Joe Turner and some kids jumping and jiving in the dark for some reason.
What stands out to me in these credits was the music was by Alexander Courage, which is a name that I saw at the beginning of every episode of Star Trek.
Because he composed the theme. I noticed that too.
As the credits end, the music continues and we find ourselves in a television studio set for a program called Rock, Roll, and Shake, which is the city's version of Bandstand.
The show is hosted by Gary Nelson and Albert X. McAllister. And basically it's just kids dancing to popular tunes of the day. We pull back and now we're watching it on television in a gaudy wallpapered room with a group of elderly people. And they are not happy.
Among them are Georgianna Fitzdingle and her husband Horace Fitzdingle.
Who's sleeping?
Georgianna is knitting. When the television program cuts to an image of Garry, Georgianna takes note. So this is the man her niece has been seeing. Well, we'll put a stop to that, won't I?
Spoiler alert, they don't. We also have Eustace Fentwick III, who is the mouthpiece of this about-to-be-formed group.
He gets up and turns off the television set and says, "You see with your own eyes how rock and roll is destroying the youth of our nation."
Somehow they do see that, even though there's no destruction going on.
But they're all disgusted and revolted by the display anyway.
Eustace nominates himself for president of a group that's going to stop this, and he names it Spray-K. I don't even remember what that stands for, do you?
Society Prevention of Rock and Roll Corruption of American Youth.
Yeah, it's not exactly a correct acronym, but we'll let it slide. Then Eustace calls for a vote, doesn't wait for a vote, names himself president, and gives his acceptance speech.
Another character in the room is Hiram. He's a mortician, and he occasionally gives lines that don't mean anything, but they give insight into his line of work.
He's always looking for another dead body. Back at the TV studio, two kids are showing off their dance moves, and they are today's winner, Carlos and Rosie from the Black Eagle Club.
Garry announces that 3 new clubs have opened, making that 78 clubs throughout the city. And Garry and Axe will be visiting these clubs in the coming week.
They close out the show, and while Axe is talking to the kids, seeing how they're doing, Garry goes over to the studio's showroom kitchen, brought to you by Whirlpool, and greets his sweetheart, June. He asks for some domestic help and tells her that she can work in his kitchen anytime. Yay, 1950s.
Yep, Garry likes to see her in this element. The kitchen looks good on her.
And if that's not a compliment, I don't know what is. Garry mentions June's cantankerous aunt and uncle, and wants to know if they know about their engagement. June says she hasn't found the right time to tell them.
And that they'd flip if they knew June and Garry were talking appliances. And she tells Garry that they've started a campaign against rock and roll.
I don't know how she knew that because it just happened right before this scene. But she probably knew it was impending. Garry says that June's aunt should know that their show has been reforming juvenile delinquents all over the city. Just asked the juvenile authority what the kids were up to before he saved them with rock and roll. It wasn't good, that's for sure.
Frank, the program manager, interrupts to tell Garry that Fats Domino is coming to the studio. Garry thinks this would be great for the kids, and he tells the kids that if they don't have any chores to do, they can stay and watch.
They also have to ask Fats if he thinks it's okay. And he says he normally doesn't do this, but since it's for the kids, he'll do it. And then he plays his new hit, Honey Child. It's a great song. There's a lot of great songs in this movie.
And after the song, Garry sends the kids off to do their chores that they supposedly had done in order to be able to stay in the first place.
Garry goes back to June once again to ask when she's going to tell them about their engagement. She doesn't know yet. And they kiss as Axe and Frank look on.
Later, we see Horace Fitzdingle carrying a large box of letters to post.
2 boxes.
Okay, 2 boxes. And Georgianna and June are there as well.
Not helping in any way. They stop in a mailbox and start pushing. It's supposed to be envelopes, but it really just looks like loose leaf flyers into the mailbox.
June says that doing this will send the kids back to the world of street gangs and slums. And Horace thinks that's something to consider. But Georgianna and Sprayke don't agree.
Now we're in the office of Bill, the station manager, Garry's boss. He's got stacks and stacks of letters on his desk. Tells Garry that they got 600 letters and every letter writer wants him dead. They're all threatening to boycott.
Everything Bill says is a little odd. It's a little off. His line readings don't feel quite right to me.
It's not like they don't match his sentiment. His emotional state doesn't match what he's saying. Instead of seeming concerned, he seems kind of delighted. He does say that it might help their ratings. And Garry says that these letters were all written by the same handful of people. If only they could hear from people who approve. He tells Bill to come down to the Black Eagle Club to talk to the kids that they're helping. But Bill's only concern is selling Shadrach shoes.
So now Garry and Axe are visiting the Black Eagle Club, one of the 78 clubs in the area, and kids are dancing and doing arts and crafts. One of the kids named Tommy has drawn a picture of an abandoned building that's being converted into something called Teen Town.
Well, in his mind, it's being converted. It's a building that the city condemned, and he's hoping that they can get that for their headquarters. That sounds super safe.
It'll take some money, but maybe they can make it happen. And they've already started work on a building fund.
Now a couple visitors arrive. This is Bugsy the gangster, if you couldn't tell by his name, and his goon, Nick. They've just returned from 3 months in the jug, and they are not happy to see their former gang members dancing, decoupaging, and drawing.
Yeah, Bugsy had been using the neighborhood kids as delivery boys, etc. But now they're going to school regularly and doing arts and crafts. He's not going to sit back and let Garry make bums of these kids.
Bugsy tells the kids to throw them crooks out, but they don't. Bugsy complains to Garry that he's committed brainwash on these kids.
Garry says they have a lot of work to do, so Bugsy can either help or get out. Nick asks if he should give them the what for, but Bugsy pulls him aside and explains that this is not the time for violence. These things require strategy.
You said it exactly how he did. They leave, and Garry moans that the club is caught between 2 different gangs that hate them. But there's no time to fret because Annitta is here to sing.
Yeah, Axe set her up to perform for the Building Benefit Fund. And she sings the song Rockin' on a Saturday Night.
And the kids dance, of course.
Her performance inspires Axe. He thinks the kids will be successful with their fundraising, and he believes that he could book a big group to help them out. And how great would it be if they did all this on the air?
Garry worries that with all those letters, there won't be a show to put it on. He says it looks more like they'll be canceled every time the mailman comes.
Axe says he would love the opportunity to tell off the writers of those letters, in court even. And this gives Garry an idea, but he'll have to mull on it.
At the studio kitchen, possibly the next day, Garry and Axe are reading the paper.
Axe comes across an article that says kids are better off hanging around jukeboxes than out on the street. And Garry realizes that he may have found an ally. After the show today, he's going to track down the writer of that article.
Yep, better they rock and roll than vandalize and steal. However, this is the moment the Spray K posse comes to visit the studio. They first meet with Axe, who impudently mocks them, mangling Eustace's name and tearing up Hiram's business card. He even insults Georgianna, and somehow her hat ends up on the dance floor amidst the kids, who are punting it around like a football.
So the spray cake crowd goes to Garry and demands to see the manager. June is in the kitchen set, wearing shorts and a t-shirt for some reason.
An exercise costume of some kind.
Garry motions to her to hide, so she ducks behind the table. And then Garry agrees to take the spray cake people to the manager's office. And as they pass by Axe, Horace is enjoying the music.
Horace is bringing up the rear of this line, and he stops to tell June, who is still hiding but not that well, that everything is going to be all right.
June goes to Axe and says, "There goes my honeymoon cottage." And Axe says it takes two sides to make a battle.
He calls himself General Axe McAllister.
The song ends, so Axe addresses the camera directly and says that a brigade of blue noses are there to shut everything down, so send in your letters in support and get your friends and family to do the same. But he says this in his own inimitable style.
Which we cannot imitate?
It's inimitable.
Of course. Then he tells the kids to dance as he throws on another record.
In the manager's office, the spray cake group is demanding that the show be shut down. Bill Bentley says he'll bring it up to his superior, but Spray Cake says they represent the public and demand it stop immediately.
Garry argues that there's just 4 people complaining, and Horace says there's only 3. Garry thinks that they shouldn't have a say, since it's just a small group of people.
Georgianna says she wants to bring sweetness back to youth, like a slow foxtrot.
Or a waltz.
Eustace says it's important that they stop this depravity, and Garry says that's exactly what they're trying to do. They've opened nearly 80 clubs in the city, giving the kids something productive to do instead of running loose on the streets.
Eustace isn't impressed, though. He threatens to let the courts sort it out, and he demands that the group leave. But Hiram stops to measure out Bill for a casket, and he leaves his card there, too.
As he leaves, he says 4 pallbearers should do.
Garry thanks Bill for backing him up, such as he did, but Bill is only doing it for the ratings, which are currently beating the network. He wants to ride this wave as far as it'll go. And then they'll move on to some new gimmick.
He does warn Garry that even if Garry does believe what he's doing is a good thing, if it affects the ratings, it will mean his job.
Garry is disgusted that a TV executive would concern himself with ratings and advertising, as though this is his first day working for television. That's all they care about. Bill scoffs at Garry, saying, "You don't really believe in the clubs and helping the kids, do you?" Unsurprisingly, Garry does believe in it. He thinks he's making a positive difference in their life, and Bill says he might have to prove that to stay on the air. Garry says he plans to do just that, and if he can't, you won't have to fire me.
Back at the Black Eagle Club, kids are doing their thing. A few are playing some music, and Axe is dancing. Garry comes in and introduces Mr. Armstrong, the writer of the article he read in the newspaper earlier. Armstrong is impressed with the work that Garry has done here. Garry says rock and roll brought these kids together, and their interest branched out from there.
Garry talks to Armstrong about the kids' plan to renovate the condemned building to serve as their new hangout, which they're going to call Teen Town. Armstrong asks how much that will cost, and Garry says about $12,000 for materials, but they'll get the labor for free. Armstrong asks if they can raise that in 90 days. If they can, he promises that the Clarion, the newspaper, will pay for the rent and upkeep of the building.
It would make a great headline, "The Clarion underwrites Teen Town."
Everyone cheers, and Armstrong leaves.
One of the kids asks Axe about the acts that he's booked on the show.
Leave this in. The way I phrased it, the kids want to know about the benefit. Axe says they should get top 10 acts like Fats Domino, Tommy Charles, and Choker Campbell to perform.
Garry tells Axe to come back to Earth, but then Axe reminds him that Gary's had some big acts on the show, so Garry agrees to pitch the idea to a few of those acts.
Back at the Fitzdingle house, June pretended she was going to the library.
June is sneaking out of the house when her Uncle Horace stops her. He says that her aunt doesn't want her going out tonight, and June says she was only going down to the library.
Uncle Horace says, yeah, and when you get to the library, warn Garry that Aunt Georgianna is bringing Spray Cake down to the concert tonight to keep an eye on it, and they're bringing the police with them too. He wants her to warn Garry about their plans. June leaves, and then Aunt Georgianna comes out, dragging an unwilling Horace along to the show.
It's benefit night, and kids are entering the Teen Town benefit. Bugsy and Nick are standing outside, wondering what is happening to the youth of today. And a poster reveals 3 big acts are appearing: Fats Domino, Joe Turner, and Tommy Charles.
We go inside the dance hall, where Fats Domino is playing his set, It's Ain't That a Shame.
The kids are enthralled with this performance.
That is not happening anywhere near them. Bugsy and Nick have come inside the club. Outside the club, Spray K rolls up. They're talking to the police car sitting on the curb. They demand that the cops come in, but the cop correctly says that the kids aren't doing anything wrong.
Eustace says that they're disturbing the peace, and the police say that they came there of their own free will and they can leave if they want.
Any complaints would have to come from the area residents, so the group decide to canvass the neighborhood to look for complainers.
Horace asks Georgianna if they could just go home. These kids aren't doing anything different than they themselves did 40 years ago.
But Georgianna is not moved by this and orders Horace to come with her if he knows what's good for him. They leave, and one of the cops quips, "I see a dame like that, and suddenly my wife looks good to me."
Inside, Joe Turner is introduced, and he performs Feeling Happy, which we get to hear for the second time because it played during the opening credits.
That's all right. It's a great song. June comes in, finds Garry, begs him to call off the concert, but he won't. They have a permit. Should be no problem with them being there.
Outside, the Spray K group returns to the police car. Fentwick has acquired 12 signatures. Georgianna only got 5 because she had to carry Horace upstairs. But 17 is enough for the police to put a stop to the show.
Show is still proceeding now, though, and Tommy Charles comes on to play Sweet Love on My Mind. The cops and Spray K people come in. June remains with Garry. She's going to show them whose side she's on. Georgianna looks disgusted at all the dancing, and even more so when she catches Horace doing it, too. X overhears Bugsy tell Nick to spread the word that the pinch is coming, and if the kids don't want to spend the night in the clink, they should blow. Axe tells Garry that Bugsy is stirring up trouble and threatens to go after him. Garry insists he not do that. He says no fights.
Then the policeman comes up to Garry and tells him to shut everything down. They're disturbing the peace. Garry says he has a concert permit, and the cop tells him that 17 sets of eardrums feel differently. Tommy Charles finishes his song, as Nick is telling the kids what Bugsy asked him to.
He implies that Garry is working with the cops, and they should all leave before they take them home in a wagon.
Axe taps Nick on the shoulder and sends him outside, saying, "No agitating in here."
The cop tells Garry to send the kids home. Garry tells the kids to fold up their tents and silently fade away, and the cop approves of this. But the kids are complaining. They paid to get in.
Axe is leading Nick outside when Bugsy jumps out from nowhere and punches Axe in the face.
This starts a melee with some of the kids joining in. Axe throws a curtain over Nick, pushes him up against the wall by some balloons, and pops them, pretending that he has a gun. Nick pulls the curtain off his face, and he sees it's only Axe there, no gun, and punches Axe. Garry tries to break up the fight, but it spills out into the street. Bugsy incites more violence by slashing the tires on Eustace's car.
And that's the kids' cue to tear the car apart. The police come out from inside, whistles blowing, and everyone scatters. Eustace demands they arrest Garry for the damage done to his car. He was contributing to the delinquency of minors. And Georgianna demands he be arrested or she'll have his job.
The cop says she's welcome to it. But the policeman demands that Garry give him a list of the kids that were tearing apart the car. Garry refuses, and none of the others will rat them out. The cop threatens Garry with an obstructions charge, prompting Eustace and Georgianna to once again demand that Garry be sent to jail. But the cop says he's going to do this by the book.
June tells Garry that he has to reveal those names, or he'll be finished if he doesn't. And Garry says he'll be finished if he does.
Horace begs Georgianna to come home with him, and Hiram complains about the lack of corpses. Georgianna gloats to June that she can now see Garry for who he really is, a common criminal, and she drags June off with her, telling the officer that he'll have to take them home. And he's thrilled.
Before he leaves, the policeman informs Garry that they'll probably want to be talking to him tomorrow, so stay available.
Axe comes up to Garry and says that it's all his fault, but Gary's more concerned about what will happen if he has to testify under oath. He'll have no choice but to tell them. Axe said the kid did a number on that car, and Garry says, "And on us." Now to the headlines. Jeff?
Teenage rioters on rampage. Local disc jockey faces possible arrest for complicity in rock and roll orgy.
I didn't see an orgy, did you? Not as I understand orgies. And they didn't get a photo of the damage, so they used Gary's 8x10 publicity photo instead.
The next day in Bill, the station manager's office, it's revealed that letters have been pouring in. Axe's pitch to the public worked.
Yes, there's still a lot of letters from the cranks, but Axe's pleas were successful, and some of the envelopes have money in them. But Bill doesn't like the threat of arrest hanging over Garry. Garry doesn't want to betray the kids, but Bill says if he doesn't cooperate with the police, then he'll give Garry 2 weeks severance pay and a guarantee that he'll never work at any TV station anywhere in the country ever again. And Bill said that he's still going to have to go to court for a contempt of court or perjury charge.
But Garry has an idea, something that will build this to a climax that will shut out every other station in town.
And Bill's 100% behind that idea.
A trial with the viewers as the jury. They can call in with their verdicts. They just need to get Eustace to agree to it. But Bill believes that he will.
Yep, it'll be Spray K versus Teen Town and set up like a real trial. Down at the Black Eagle, the kids are watching Big Joe Turner on television performing lipstick, powder, and paint. They look a little subdued here.
Axe comes in and turns off the television. And then he tells them that Garry hasn't revealed the names of the kids involved in the incident.
He asks if they're going to the trial tonight, and one of the boys says, yeah, there's nothing else to do. Axe promises that they're going to win this trial. And unless the prosecution asks Garry for the names, he won't give them. One of the kids says, what if they don't ask him any questions? And Axe says if that's what happens, then they have a fighting chance.
Then Axe leaves, and Tommy takes charge. He says that they've got a whole new plan. And they dissolve out of the shot, leaving us hanging.
Speaking of hanging things, over at the Fitzdingle house, the Spray K group is planning their strategy for the trial. Eustace is now gunning for the presidency. Of what? I'm not sure. And Horace nominates Georgianna to be the vice president.
Georgianna says she doesn't know that she wants to travel that far because she'll hardly ever get to see him. And Horace says that's it, it's settled. He's going to take her right home right now and help her pack.
The studio is set up for the trial. June and Garry are talking. June asks if he's going to turn over the list of kids who committed vandalism. Garry says that he isn't going to do that. Garry wants to know if she'll still love him if he's in prison.
June and Garry are sharing a kiss when Spray K comes in. Georgianna tells Garry that after this, he'll be doing that from a jail cell. And then Horace tells Georgianna not to get upset because she'll ruffle the feathers in her hat.
Eustace predicts that the trial is going to go his way. And in his opening statements, he compares rock music to bestiality and cannibalism. Garry counters by saying that dance is an art form.
Eustace presents Exhibit A. Music is played and kids dance, and while this is happening, a film is rolled. Australian Aborigines dancing.
Gee, is he trying to say that there's something wrong with Aboriginals dancing?
I'm not sure what this is supposed to prove.
It's really gross. I think I know what he's implying, and I don't like it. Now to Exhibit B.
Eustace calls for an example of real music. Aloysius Pentagrouch, kid with glasses, is brought to the stand.
He was the kid with glasses in Drag Strip Girl, too.
He plays piano, Beethoven, Chopin, Tchaikovsky, but not rock and roll.
Then Eustace calls down a ballerina, whose sophisticated dance is supposed to be a counterpoint to the vulgar dancing of the teens. And the Aboriginals, I guess.
So Aloysius is playing some Chopin on the piano, and she dances.
And once concluded, all the Spray K people applaud.
And now it's Garry's witness. Garry asks Aloysius if he believes music is open to interpretation.
And Aloysius says, yes.
Garry then asks him to play the last 32 bars, but faster and accentuate the rhythm.
And he can't quite get it at first, but Axe pounds on the piano to give him the tempo, and he gets it. And then two kids start bebopping to the music. See, Garry says, it's just the interpretation. The times we live in determine the tempo in which we live.
And next, Gary Nelson is called to the stand.
Who's going to interrogate Garry? He's the defense attorney here?
Eustace reminds him that he's under oath, and then he asks Garry to name the kids who were involved with the incident.
Eustace asks Garry if he was there at the incident. Garry says yes, he was at the concert, planned to raise money for the teens. And the judge says that's going beyond the scope of the question. Just say yes or no. Eustace asks if there was violence, and Garry says yes, provoked by busybodies who had no business being there. And again, he gets served with an objection.
He's then asked again to give the names of the kids involved in the incident. Gary's silent, but then someone hands him a signed confession from the kids involved.
Oh, wow, the day is saved. Garry does not have to rat them out.
Eustace objects, but the judge accepts the evidence.
Now it's Gary's turn to cross-examine himself. So he goes from sitting in the chair to standing in front of it to ask himself questions, and this allows him to explain that it was Bugsy who started the fight. Garry asks if he can identify Bugsy, and of course he can, because Bugsy's there for some reason. So he points to Bugsy, then calls him to the stand.
But he points to him as the attorney and not as the witness, so he'd be leading the witness, so they should have objected.
This trial is making a mockery of the court system.
So Bugsy Smith is called to the stand. The first question is they wonder why he was there, and Bugsy says that he was there to keep an eye on his kids. He says that since Garry came along, the kids have been going to school regularly, painting, some have even been going to church. He's ruined the neighborhood.
So point to Garry. Eustace declines to cross-examine Bugsy. So Garry calls up 55-year-old Axe McAllister to represent the group of teens. But unfortunately, X can only speak in slang.
X speaks hipster and the judge doesn't, so Gary's going to have to translate.
This is pretty silly, the way this goes on. We even get subtitles for the viewers at home or in the theater. The only part of the testimony that really matters is that X vouched for Garry helping the kids.
Eustace still believes he has evidence to present. He shows another film of kids dancing, which he says is evidence of depravity.
But Gary's got a film of his own. He plays some film of flappers dancing the Charleston. Eustace says that's fine, but none of his people ever participated in those decadent antics.
Horace rushes over to whisper something to June, and June rushes over to Garry to whisper it to Garry, and Garry asks for the film to be replayed.
He pauses it on a frame where we see a young woman in the midst of kicking her legs out doing the Charleston and asks Georgianna if that's her. She tries to say no, but then finally admits it. But she was young and dumb then.
And Garry says, and you turned out okay, so we just want to do the same thing for these kids.
Yeah, they should have the same chance to find their way. And then he appeals to the audience to vote for the kids and donate to the building fund.
The verdict is in, and the kids have won, but Garry has one more piece of evidence he'd like to present. Fats Domino is in the studio, and they can pipe it in. So everybody watches while Fats plays I'm in Love Again.
I like this song too. And then the teens begin dancing, and then Horace begins dancing. And he finally gets a backbone and demands that Georgianna dance with him. And threatens her with a caning, which kind of turns her on. Not really approving of this. But they go dance. So I guess it all worked out okay.
Frank announces to the judge that they're off the air. The judge is very relieved. Fats continues to sing and everyone dances as the movie ends.
And the last title says, "This is the most, to say the least." Welcome back to the American International Podcast, where we are rockin' and boppin' to Shake, Rattle, and Rock from 1956.
Filming for Shake, Rattle, and Rock began on July 23, 1956. It was the first in a series of films for Sunset Productions distributed by American International Pictures.
AIP nearly lost a bidding war to 20th Century Fox when they got Fats Domino, who was then the #1 rock and roll star, to appear in the movie. In Sam Arkoff's autobiography, he says it took them many days of negotiation to obtain the right to Domino's songs, as the record company demanded more money than Arkoff was willing to pay. I bet everybody does that. Arkoff said that he told Lou Chud, that's his real name, at Imperial Records, "If you're going to demand that much money, we'll have him sing all his songs live." They'd already gotten permission of the music publisher to do just that. A week later, Chud tried to pull out of their deal, as Fox had offered Domino $25,000 to sing just one song in their film The Girl Can't Help It. Arkoff threatened to go to court to get an injunction against the Fox appearance, and Chud caved in. But Domino actually did appear in that film, so they must have rearranged his schedule so he could do both.
Chud did say that they'd have to get Fats himself to agree to be in the movie, so Alex Gordon and Edward Cahn drove to Ontario to see Fats playing to a packed nightclub audience. They talked to Fats Domino, telling him they could film the entire thing in one day. Domino agreed, but when Gordon went to pick up Domino to take him to set, he was told by Domino's bodyguards that he was sleeping and couldn't be disturbed. Gordon defied them, went to Domino's room, and after waking up the sleeping singer and reminding him of his agreement to sing in the film, got Domino to the set where he filmed his songs in one take.
But there was to be one more Domino dilemma. Once Fats sang to camera, Arkoff and Nicholson were surprised to hear that Domino seemed to be singing in slow motion, as they said. Unable to figure out what was wrong, Arkoff called the record company executive, who told Arkoff that they sped up his recordings for the records. And Domino likely didn't even realize they were doing that. AIP ended up having Domino lip-sync his recorded hits for the film.
Arkoff said, because we were aiming for youth audiences who were enamored with rock and roll, we put up with the eccentricities of rock stars more than we ever did with actors.
Jim Nicholson told producer Alex Gordon that it would look a little cheesy, as the book I read quoted, to have Gordon's name on both Runaway Daughters and Shake, Rattle, and Rock, since they were issued as a double bill. So Nicholson gave himself producer credit for Shake, Rattle, and Rock. But that argument doesn't really hold water, as Lou Rusoff and Edward Cahn were both credited for each film. So it makes you kind of wonder if Nicholson had unsavory motives in crediting himself as producer there.
Shake, Rattle, and Rock was first released in November of 1956 with a wide release on April 5, 1957 on a double bill with Runaway Daughters.
AIP promoted the movie by sending a special exploitation package to DJs all over the country. The package contained records of the movie's songs and photo stills to give away in radio contests. Movie exhibitors were excited to work with AIP. Well, some of them were. One Minnesota theater owner said he liked doing business with American International and that, quote, "This is a wonderful rock and roll show," end quote, only to then complain that he was very disappointed in the business. But a Texas theater owner said, "We played this with Runaway Daughters and drew our biggest Sunday and Monday crowds of the year. If you can book this when Fats has a record on top, as we did, it cannot miss."
Box Office Magazine recommended theater owners contact record stores for window displays of Fats Domino and his record albums or single platters. A dance contest on the stage with prizes for the liveliest couples will attract attention.
Taglines for the movie include rock and roll versus the squares.
The rockinest, boppinest, rollinest jam session you've ever seen.
See and hear Fats Domino, America's top recording star of rock and roll, and other recording stars in a lively musical jamboree.
Box Office Magazine said this film was strictly for teenagers and rock and roll enthusiasts, saying, "This modest budget programmer should delight this sizable audience. With adult patrons, it may be another matter. The story by Lou Rusoff, such as it is merely a peg on which to hang the noisy songs and lively dance numbers." The most amusing portrayals are contributed by Sterling Holloway, a veteran who can still look and act like a teenager, and Margaret Dumont, the former Marx Brothers foil, who is so adept at playing haughty dowagers. Edward L. Cahn's direction is adequate.
Ouch. The Hollywood Reporter said there are some rock and roll artists involved whose names will aid in the marquee dressing, and the picture itself is definitely enough done to please the younger fans.
The film was remade for part of the Rebel Highway series of films for Showtime Cable Television in 1994. That version starred Renee Zellweger and Howie Mandel and was directed by Alan Arkush.
Looking at the cast and the other AIP productions they have appeared in, we find Mike Touch Connors was in Five Guns West and The Day the World Ended in 1955. He was in The Oklahoma Woman and Flesh in the Spur in 1956. And he would go on to appear in Voodoo Woman in 1957 and The Suicide Battalion in 1958.
Lisa Gaye, who played June Fitzdingle, didn't appear in any other films produced by American International Pictures, but she did appear in Face of Terror in 1962, which was distributed by American International Television in their Sci-Fi 65 and Amazing 66 syndicated television packages.
Sterling Holloway, who we know very well as the voice of Winnie the Pooh in the early Disney films, served as the narrator in the animated Alakazam in 1960.
Raymond Hatton, who played Horace Fitzdingle, had previously appeared in The Day the World Ended in 1955 for Roger Corman, and for the director of this film, Edward L. Cahn, he appeared in Girls in Prison and Flesh in the Spur in 1956, and Invasion of the Saucermen and Motorcycle Gang in 1957.
Paul Dubov, who's Bugsy, appeared in Apache Woman and The Day the World Ended in 1956, and he was in The She Creature and Voodoo Woman in 1957.
Jimmy Pickford, who played Eddie, who must be one of the kids, would appear in Invasion of the Saucermen in 1957.
Frank Jenks, who was Frank, the TV station manager, was in The She Creature and The Amazing Colossal Man, also in 1957. And Eddie Kafafian, who's Nick, was in The Flesh and the Spur in 1956 and Motorcycle Gang in 1957.
Nancy Kilgus, who played Nancy, who must be another one of the kids, would later appear in High School Hellcats and as a dancer in The Spider, both in 1958.
Leon Tyler, the kid in glasses, or Aloysius Pennygrouch, was also a nerd. He was Ben Smith, the kid with glasses, in Drag Strip Girl in 1957, then went on to appear in Submarine Seahawk in 1958, and in The Ghost of Drag Strip Hollow in 1959. So, Jeff, we've heard what other people thought about Shake, Rattle, and Rock from 1956, and now I want to know how you feel. Great at using our AIP scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic.
Well, I really enjoyed this movie. It's quite silly at times, and I don't know if that's why I enjoyed it, but I did enjoy it. I'm trying to think of the point of time when this was released, what was going on in the world. Rock and roll was still relatively new. Rock Around the Clock had been a hit in 1955, which is considered to be the beginning of rock and roll. Elvis had just made his first national television appearance in January of 56, and Heartbreak Hotel was released later in that month. And Shake, Rattle, and Rock began shooting in July of that year. When watching this from today's perspective, the idea of this television show with features, records, and dancing, it feels very much like American Bandstand. And even American Bandstand wouldn't have been known outside of Philadelphia at that time. In July of 1956, the original host of Bandstand was Bob Horn, and he was let go following a drunk driving incident, and Dick Clark was hired in his place. But that show wouldn't go national until the middle of 1957. So I don't know if that was a direct influence of this or not. I don't know if there were other shows. There probably were similar shows in different regions. And this wouldn't just be a case of great minds thinking alike. What's really interesting about this movie is that it's geared toward kids, but the kids aren't really characters in this film. They're all background characters, and they're really barely relevant. And all of the other characters, with the possible exception of Gary Nelson and Judah Fitzdingle, are cartoon characters. The members of the Spray K crowd tend to speak in one-liners. Everything you say is a joke. They might not get the joke among themselves, but the audience certainly will. The character of Bugsy Smith, I'm not even sure why he's here. I mean, the only thing that makes sense is that he's there to incite the vandalism that occurs, which I guess gives this movie its only bit of drama, leaving Garry with his should I or shouldn't I betray these kids. The character of Axe is obviously a cartoon character. He's not Winnie the Pooh. He's something totally different. And the judge himself, we didn't really talk about him, but he's all and doing double takes. And to me, this movie felt very much like a product. And while it's not realistic, it is a joy to watch. What I think is important about this movie, though, is that even though they're lip syncing, it does preserve performances by Fats Domino and Joe Turner and Tommy Charles, whoever that is, that might not otherwise have been saved anywhere. The sets themselves aren't all that impressive. Most of it takes place in the television studio, which is just a curtain hanging on the wall. And even when they have the court set, it's just the bench and the witness chair against the curtain. And the whole thing feels like it could have been a high school play, the way it's staged and the way it's written, if it was written by high schoolers. But again, I wouldn't say that these are bad things because the movie is very entertaining. But I just don't see this as being the cream of the crop when it comes to AIP. So as much as I enjoy it, I'm only going to give this one an I. What do you think, Cheryl?
I'm surprised. Well, on first viewing this movie, I too thought it seemed very slight, very stagey, pretty silly, but I thought it had a killer soundtrack and it was worth at least an eye for that alone. But when I watched it again, I found that while my original opinion hadn't changed that much, I found the movie to be quite endearing. It's a wholesome picture about the evils of rock and roll. And though it feels pretty cheesy today, it probably found an appreciative audience of teenage moviegoers back in 1956. It's hard not to like a movie that has a bunch of good-intentioned adults defending the younger generation's right to like what they like. Even putting that sentiment on trial, sort of, against a bunch of pearl-clutching fuddy-duddies who forgot that they were once the kids who scandalized their parents by bobbing their hair and dancing the Lindy Hop in their flapper dresses. Throughout history, going back as far as Socrates, there always seems to be a faction of older folks who condemn whatever the young people of their day are enjoying, because their taste became calcified as they age, and they think anything that came out after they hit their 20s is automatically bad. I don't really agree with that. I think that maybe I don't understand it, and maybe I don't like it, but these kids do, and there's probably a good reason for that. So I enjoyed that aspect of the film. And I said I enjoyed the music, and I did. Second time around, it's just as fun. But watching it, I found that I also loved the dancing. Those kids can swing. They're not really characters in the movie, but as background players, they do a great job. They're having fun, so we in the audience have fun with them too. It is kind of weird for a movie aimed at teens that really had no teens as main characters. I think if kids wrote this movie, they would put themselves as the stars and not Garry and June or Axe. Instead, we have characters like Uncle Horace and Axe McAllister, who are young at heart, I guess. And I did love Sterling Holloway as Axe. It's really fun seeing a man who looks like a scarecrow and sounds like Winnie the Pooh jumping and jiving. The younger adults, June and Garry, they weren't as fun. especially June, who seems to be mostly found in and interested in kitchen appliances and cooking. I can't relate to that. It's a sign of the times, but it makes her a boring character. And she really didn't share Gary's commitment to the kids either, because she kept trying to get him to cave in and rat out the kids. Garry, he's no Dick Clark, but he was a good guy. I didn't buy him as a DJ, though. And as for what Bugsy was doing there, I think he was there to show that the kids had progressed from being street hoodlums to being good kids. So he had to be there to provide the temptation for them to backslide. And then Garry had to fight against that. It's sort of like the good angel, bad angel dilemma. And while it was silly and slight and probably would have been a 50-minute movie without all the musical numbers, I did enjoy Shake, Rattle, and Romp. I thought it was a fun romp, that it was a prime example, not of good movie making, but of AIP's early commitment to making movies to appeal to a teenage audience, one that hadn't really been served before. So I'm giving it an A. Well, Jeff, I think it's time to take off our dancing shoes and end this episode of the American International Podcast. I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in.
Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.